Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbour bitter envy and selfish ambitions in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly and spiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure and peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. This is the word of the Lord.
Morning. My name's Emma Hayward and I'm a member of the congregation here at Holy Trinity. I'm married to Phil and we've got 3 school-aged children. And one of the things we really love in our family is books. We all really love books. And one of my favourite writers is the poet Pam Ayres. I really like her humorous take on everyday problems. At a time when the main plagues affecting the UK were a rare disease affecting cows called BSE, I don't know if any of you remember that one, and foot and mouth, which affected sheep, she wrote these lines. You know, this world is complicated, imperfect and oppressed, and it's not hard to feel timid, apprehensive and depressed. It seems that all around us, tides of questions ebb and flow, and people want solutions, but they don't know where to go. Opinions abound, but who is wrong and who is right? People need a prophet, a diffuser of the light, someone they can turn to as the crises rage and swirl, someone with the remedy, the wisdom, and the pearl. Well, they should have asked my husband. He'd have told them then and there. His thoughts on immigration, teenage mothers, Tony Blair, the future of the monarchy, house prices in the south, the wait for hip replacements, BSE, and foot and mouth. So that's the first 3 verses of Pam Ayres' poem, My Husband. And she's spot on, isn't she, when she says that people are looking for wisdom in the midst of an uncertain world, but she doesn't sound entirely convinced that her husband is the person they should turn to. So today we're looking at heavenly wisdom. God is wise, and we as his children are to be like him. But what characterizes heavenly wisdom as opposed to what passes for wisdom in worldly terms? What are the ingredients of heavenly wisdom? Do you need to be an academic, someone with a lot of knowledge? Do you need to be good with words so that what you say can easily be made into internet memes? Do you need to be well known so lots of people can benefit from your wise words? Or do you just need to be really certain of yourself and your opinions so that you get a good following? In today's passage, James draws a contrast between people expressing worldly opinions and those who have wisdom that comes to them from God. So firstly, let's have a look at false wisdom. Now, James is really passionate about this because he is so concerned about the unity of the church. In verse 16, he tells us that the end result of false wisdom is disorder and commotion in the church and evil of every kind. He doesn't mince his words. I think everybody who's preached on the book of James has used exactly that phrase. He doesn't mince his words. In fact, James actually says that false wisdom is demonic. It would be nice to think that if something was demonic, that it would be pretty easy to spot, but it isn't. In verse 14, he says, if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. So apparently, not only were the people he was writing to holding wrong opinions, but they'd embraced them to such an extent that they thought they were worth boasting about. The phrase bitter envy uses the Greek word zeal. And sometimes we think about zeal as a really positive thing. It means fervent and enthusiastic. But in this case, it doesn't mean fervent devotion to God, but actually anger fueled by jealousy or envy. And likewise, selfish ambition refers to people who are vying for power and prestige with an inordinate desire to work for their own interests. So in James's time, as now, there were people who were known for their energetic opinions, but whose hearts were hard and not submitted to God. But somehow they'd wrapped it all up and felt that it was a virtue. Maybe they just got so caught up in what they were speaking about and campaigning for, they didn't even recognize that their underlying motivation wasn't right. It's easy done. It's happened to me. A few months ago at work, we began the process of reviewing the job plans of salaried doctors like myself. And at first I was able to get involved, bring suggestions, try to be as helpful as I could for my colleagues. Unfortunately, it became apparent over time that none of the suggestions we were making were getting a very positive response, and I found myself getting increasingly negative and disheartened about it. There came another meeting when I reiterated the things that were frustrating me, but even as I said them, I knew that my heart wasn't right. The content of what I was saying, what I said, was no different from previous meetings, but it was coming from a place of bitterness and negativity. I felt I had to apologize, and I did so. In Jeremiah 17, it says that the heart is deceitful above all else. But the next verse tells us that the Lord searches the heart and examines the mind. It's so important to allow God to search our hearts, to check that what we're saying isn't contaminated by bitterness or anger or selfishness. We don't want to be known as people whose zeal is a destructive force. So let's have a closer look now at what heavenly wisdom really looks like. In the Message version, verse 17 is translated, real wisdom, God's wisdom, begins with a holy life and is characterized by getting along with others. That was one of the first things that struck me as I prepared this sermon. Whilst the world might think of wise people as intellectuals, deep thinkers, great writers who can communicate deep thoughts on how to live life well, the Bible tells us that it's about relationships. Let's just sit with that for a second. Heavenly wisdom is about relationships. It's about a holy relationship with God, resulting in purity of heart and life, and getting on with others. It's not something that can be learned exactly. It's more something that is given to those who are in a right relationship with God. Heavenly wisdom is pure, peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. We don't have time to go into depth about every one of those characteristics, but we're going to take a look at a few. First of all, heavenly wisdom is pure, uncontaminated, no twisted motives. When I was trying to think of an example of purity, I was really surprised that the first person who came to my mind was my 7-year-old son, Zach. Now, anyone who knows anything about 7-year-old boys knows that they have a rather well-developed sense of toilet humor and would not often be described as pure. And I can tell you that Zach is absolutely no different. But if you get him talking about money and possessions, he just has this really straightforward, pure approach. In Zach's mind, if you've got something and someone else needs it, you just give it to them. In his mind, it is simple, and he lives by it. Now, it's easy for a grown-up to say, yeah, well, that's not the way the world works. But what if this 7-year-old boy has actually tapped into pure heavenly wisdom? After all, in Proverbs, the book of wisdom, it does say, do not withhold good from those who deserve it when it's in your power to act. Just think what the world would look like if we just took God's instructions and applied them with Zach-style purity. Secondly, heavenly wisdom is also peace-loving and considerate. It doesn't go looking for a fight or easily rise to the bait. People with heavenly wisdom will do what James suggests in chapter 1, which is to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. There are many people who have been misunderstood and misrepresented during this pandemic. Teachers particularly come to mind. I've heard some of them demanding public inquiries as to what has gone on. But Psalm 37 gives this alternative bit of wisdom. It says this: "Commit your way to the Lord and wait patiently for him, and he will do this. He will make your righteousness shine like the dawn, the justice of your cause like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when men succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret. It only leads to evil." Now that is not going to be easy to do. It takes great faith to take something that you're passionate about, something that affects you deeply, and leave it for God to deal with. But this is heavenly wisdom. Let God fight for you. Don't feel you need to defend yourself all the time. Remember back in chapter 1, James told us that religion that God accepts is pure and faultless, involves keeping oneself from being polluted by the world. The problem is that no matter how right our argument might be, it is incredibly hard to defend it without slipping into selfish ambition or unrighteous zeal. Am I suggesting that we should never speak up or speak out? Well, no. But I am suggesting that we should not do so lightly or thoughtlessly. We should be really careful about the things that we respond to online. And if we do engage in protest or campaigning, we need to be accountable to others and continually allow God to have access to our hearts and to search our thoughts. If you're having a bit of a reaction against me saying this, may I gently suggest that you need to check in with God right now. When Simon gave us a prophetic word at the beginning of the year, he talked about a twofold fire, the crucible and the furnace. And as I prepared this sermon, I was just really conscious that this message was part of the crucible, designed to bring us into a deeper level of holiness. We're just right in the crucible now. The third thing is that heavenly wisdom is submissive, which means being willing to learn or be corrected, being able to respond to godly leadership. Holy Trinity, this is where the rubber hits the road. God has placed certain people in authority over us: Elaine, John, Jit, Simon, the MSC pioneers. They're not perfect, but they are the people that God has chosen to lead us at this time. We might not agree with everything they say, and we may dislike the way that they say it. But nevertheless, we are to be quick to listen, to learn, and to be corrected. I'm really thankful that God has given us such humble servants in our leadership team. They don't use their authority to demand obedience from us. But our place is to honor that by being willing to accept their leadership. So where have we got to so far? Heavenly wisdom is relational. It's pure, peace-loving, and not defensive. It's characterized by humility and submissiveness. And it lives in people who are impartial and sincere. Heavenly wisdom is found in places the world is least likely to look. One last example. When the theologian and writer Henry Nouwen went to work as an assistant at Last Daybreak, which is a community where people with disabilities live alongside their helpers, his fans were surprised and some were even appalled. How could this great thinker and inspirational writer give up his studies to spend time washing and dressing and feeding people? Unwise move? Well, even Henry had his doubts at times. But during his time at Daybreak, Henry cared for Adam. Adam was a man who could not speak. He had frequent seizures, and he required assistance with every aspect of daily life. Adam appeared to have no concepts, plans, or ambitions, nothing that the world would call wisdom. But Adam, more than any book or professor, led Henry to the person of Jesus. In this book, Adam, God's Beloved, Henry Nouwen wrote this: "In our society, we keep looking for guides. We so much hope that someone can help us make sense out of our confusion. We look mostly for men and women with a reputation, with wisdom, psychological insight, spiritual sensitivity, and solid life experience. Adam was the least controlling and most dependent guide I've ever encountered. He rooted me in the community, opened my heart to the gift of vulnerability, and led me to confront my own abyss. People were drawn closer to God through simply being with Adam. He was simply present, offering himself in peace." So Adam was a man who was completely impartial and sincere. He couldn't be any other way. He had nothing that the world would consider as wisdom, but he led not just Henry, but many people into a deeper understanding of God. So the world really needs heaven's wisdom right now, but it won't be found in the newspaper columns or in the scientific journals. You'll not hear it from politicians or celebrities. No, because our God uses the foolish things of the world to shame the wise and the weak to shame the strong. You'll find heavenly wisdom in the purity of a child, in the silence of a retort left unsaid, and in people that the world overlooks. Heavenly wisdom also needs to be found in us, in the church. So, who is wise and understanding among you? Show it by your good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. Amen.